Everyone, we are now at the last session of the day under the Vishaya, that is Foundational Ideas in IKS. And the last session under this Vishaya is Srishti, Sthiti and Laya by Sh Shivakumar GV. A little bit about Sh Shivakumar Ji. Sh Shivakumar GV is an IT professional with deep interest in Bhartiya Samskriti and is also working in the field of learning and development with 20+ years of experience. His special areas of interest are Mahabharata and Rigveda. He writes on Mahabharata regularly at INDICA Today, where he contributes as a consulting editor and anchors Kannada content on Indic civilization and culture. He is also one of the authors of Unsung Valor, Forgotten Wars of Kurukshetra, curated by Sai Swarupa Iyer for Indica.org. He is currently curating an anthology on Indian women of substance for Indica.org. He is greatly inspired by the rivers of India, for they represent the unstopping flow of the Sanatana Dharma. He considers River Saraswati as the representative of the essence of Bharatiya Parampara. So we look forward to you, Shivakumarji, for your ideas, your thoughts, your explanations on.
Thank you so much, Dr. Richa. Shri Gurubhyo Namaha, Hari Om, Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Shri Hariji, can you please put the presentation? Okay. As mentioned, today's session is about Srishti, Sthiti and Laya. Before I begin, I'll just make a couple of sentences on my own journey in this direction. I was in this constant look for what is the foundational set of concepts through which a lot that we see and experience as part of Bharatiya Parampara can be significantly explained. And that took me to the relationship between Srishti, Sthiti and Laya and the implications of that relationship, which is what I present here today in this presentation. Next slide, Rita. All of us, in one way or the other, are concerned with the following questions. What are the objectives of life? What do we mean by a good life? What is success and happiness? At a deeper level, we begin to ask questions such as, why are we born? Where do we end up? But on the ground, we ask questions such as, how do we manage change? What is stability in this ever-changing globalized world? What drives our lives? Or what drives a society or a civilization? What are those fundamental parameters? At a personal level, we begin to wonder, what is a right and what is a duty and how do we define that? What is wrong and what is right? And why is something wrong and why is something right? I began to wonder about these questions and what are the answers for these questions in Bharatiya Parampara. But more importantly, what is the foundation, philosophical foundation using which these answers to these questions are created? That is more important. The answer to many of these questions come from the Purusharthas that we are all very, very familiar with in the Bharatiya Parampara, the Chaturvidha Purusharthas. But the philosophical foundation for the Purusharthas and the foundation to answer these questions comes from our Srishti Sthiti Laya relationship. The Srishti Sthiti Laya and the interrelationship between them creates a beautiful conceptual web, which we call as the ontological foundation of Bhartiya Parampara, which is what we will just briefly look in this presentation. Next slide, please. So the structure of this presentation, initially we will go into the Purusharthas, which is the civilizational anchor of Bharatiya Parampara. Then we will go into the Vedic vision of Srishti, Sthiti, Laya. We'll get a glimpse of each of these concepts, Sthiti, more importantly, how Srishti and Laya are related with Sthiti. We will then touch upon a very important differentiator in Bharatiya Parampara called the Rita. Then we will see Srishti, Sthiti, Laya with Dharma and Rita together. That is the integrated view of Srishti, Sthiti, Laya and the Purusharthas. Then we will briefly touch upon a theory of Srishti, that is a theory of creation. How is our perspective of Srishti different from the rest of the civilizations? In this context, we will learn Dharma and Moksha. Then we will put all of them together and imagine the dynamic of life and the position of karma, which is what is very important to us. In the second part of the presentation, after establishing the foundation of the Purusharthas and the Srishti, Sthiti, Laya, we will go into the implications of this relationship, the civilizational implications, such as how we view change differently. Why is sustainability a fundamental element of Bharatiya Parampara? How do we view progress and material world, and why is it different from the other civilizations? How is our perspective of time different? What is our perspective of Saundarya? And so on and so forth. So this is the structure of this discussion today. Next slide, please. So a brief about the Chaturvidha Purusharthas. All of us are aware that Chaturvidha is the fourfold: Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha. In the Vedas, you will repeatedly see Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha being referred to together and in that sequence. So the Artha is nothing but health, wealth, security, purpose of life, meaning and all of that. Kama is the collective of all desires and fascinations. Dharma is the all-binding force and the balance creator. And why do we need it? We will see. Moksha is that renunciation and liberation from which you are independent of everything that is happening, yet you are active in the universe. Fine. These four concepts are presented to us normally in a very independent fashion, but there is an interrelationship between them that is the differentiator. So what are those interrelationships? Artha and Kama. Artha is the set of all instruments that help us fulfill our lives. But the Artha pursuing of two individuals can clash with each other. The Artha pursuing of two communities can clash with each other, and two nations can clash with each other. Similarly, Kama. So the pursuit of Artha and Kama of any two adjacent or being in the same universe, that will clash. Artha and Kama are instruments for our fulfillment of material desires and that of the mind. But the clash requires that Dharma steps in and balances it. Which means Dharma is that which sustains Artha and Kama for the entire world and to the individuals. So it is needed to balance the clash. But what is more important is that Moksha, it is the pursuit of moksha that sustains our pursuit of dharma too. Otherwise, at some stage, even dharma will slip without somebody in the universe pursuing moksha or the paths of moksha. So the renunciation is a fundamental necessity for even dharma to sustain itself. Hence this relationship, as you see in the diagram, moksha sustains dharma and dharma sustains artha and kama. And this relationship means a world of difference, in the way, we approach things. Next slide, please. So basically the vision of the Purusharthas or the concern of the Purusharthas is that we must create sustainable artha and kama for entire humanity, not just for individuals. So it is a collection, it's a sigma as we call in mathematics. The sigma artha and sigma kama should be sustainable. And that is the concern of dharma and moksha. Fundamentally, the Purusharthas provide us with a framework of life where fulfillment of our needs and desires are equitable and sustainable for entire society. Means it is not maximized for an individual, rather it is maximized for a society at a particular point in time. In other ways, it is also saying that there is an emphasis on the present, but without you losing the sight of the future. You only fulfill as much as is left for the future also to fulfill itself. So a fulfilling life in a sustainable manner, a beautiful today, but a sustainable tomorrow. So as much beauty for today, as much as it does not take away from tomorrow. That is the concern of the Purusharthas. But where is this interrelationship coming from? What is the philosophical basis of this interrelationship? That is where comes the relationship of Srishti, Sthiti, Laya. Next slide, please. So there are two premises with which we will start this discussion and proceed further. So the premise one is that the universe of life, it's not just the physical life, it's the universe of life is in constant motion. It is dynamic. It is all the time changing. That is the premise one. However, the universe this life is governed by a Vedic concept called Rita, which is also referred to as universal principles of cosmic order. And what is the relationship of this with Purushartha? The Kama and Artha are the instruments of this change. So our Kama related actions and our Artha related actions will move the world, will change the world. But they should be governed by Rita. This is the first premise. The second premise is that fine, the world is in constant change, but the universe of life should be in a natural balance at all times. And that is referred to as Sthiti. Sthiti, it should be in stable equilibrium. It may be changing, but each changed state should be in a stable equilibrium state. So dynamic but stable equilibrium. That is Sthiti. That is our perspective of life. We recognize that change must happen, will happen whether we like it or not. But change must be in accordance to Rita for balance, and each new state of change must be in balance, and that is called as Sthiti. What is the relationship of Sthiti with Purushartha? Individuals seeking moksha enables the universe being in Sthiti, while Artha and Kama result in change which needs to be governed by Rita. Sthiti is pursued by individuals pursuing moksha. So this is the interrelationship between sthiti fundamentally and purusharthas. These two premises, along with the purushartha perspective, ensure that Bharatiya Parampara is significantly different in literally every aspect of life, and some of which we will see in the subsequent slides. Next slide, please. So let us understand, we defined sthiti as dynamic, changing, but always in balance, the ideal state of the universe. Where does Srishti and Laya step in this? So, the fact that sthiti is dynamic, the dynamism is represented by Srishti, which means that Srishti is within sthiti. And this aspect is beautifully explained in the Bhagavata. One should read Bhagavata, the Skanda 2 and Skanda 3, where Srishti is explained and how Srishti is there for the purpose of sthiti. Similarly, Laya, the destruction, is also part of sthiti, which means the interrelationship between Srishti, Sthiti, Laya is that sthiti contains Srishti and Laya. This relationship where Srishti and Laya work for sthiti, where sthiti is defined as changing, represented by Srishti, but the changed state is always desired to be in balance, which is governed by Rita. This is the unique relationship in Bharatiya Parampara between Srishti, Sthiti and Laya. So Srishti is that dynamic element of dynamic in Sthiti. It is the force of change and novelty. It is essentially somewhat subordinated to Sthiti. That is, it serves the purpose of Sthiti. It ought not to be fully independent. So Srishti shifts the state of the universe of life. It sometimes can disturb dynamic equilibrium. So it needs to be governed. What governs it? Rita governs it. And we will see how Rita translates into Dharma. So in very many Puranic stories, you will see Srishti going wrong and then something else stepping in and correcting it over a period of time. So you will see many stories in the Puranas. So we celebrate Srishti only when it is in line with Rita. There is no universal celebration of change or novelty or Srishti in India. Srishti is celebrated only when it is in line with Rita. It is our constant endeavor to align Srishti with Sthiti. So mankind's primary concern, according to our Srishti, Sthiti, Laya and Purushartha, is that ensure Srishti and Laya are always in accordance to Rita and ensure Sthiti. So we negotiate change in accordance to Rita. It's not that we push for change and then struggle to align that with Sthiti. We constantly work on the change. The change is in line with Rita. Human action, we recognize that Bharatiya Parampara recognizes that human actions are capable of being not aligned with Rita and Sthiti. Hence, it is a struggle, it is an effort, it is a tapasya to align our Srishti with Sthiti. This is the philosophical worldview of Bharatiya Parampara. And this is significantly different from the West because Srishti is not completely delinked from Sthiti as it happens in many other civilizations. Next slide, please. So in some way, so the Srishti Sthiti Laya relationship is like this. Sthiti is aligned with Moksha, Mukti. Srishti, Artha and Kama serve the purpose of Srishti. And in some ways, the trajectory of life can be like this blue line where our Dharma and Artha and Kama actions, if they are dharmic, if they are according to Rita, then it follows through a balanced path and increases the chances of individuals attaining mukti. This is at one level. There are complications, and we'll see what those complications are in the coming slides. Next slide, please. So let's understand what this Rita is. Anybody doing Sandhya Vandana will know that there are mantras like Rathancha Satyam Chavi, Idhat. In the Vedas, Rita and Satya come constantly together, and at other times, Rita and Dharma comes constantly together. Rita is a very, very, very important concept in Bhartiya Parampara and the Vedas. Unfortunately, not discussed too much. It is defined as Vishwa Niyamaka Tattva, universal cosmic rules for the world order. So basically, these rules, they're not rules, they're principles. They determine the eternal flow of life in a sustainable path. So the way, the whole, purpose of the whole conceptual framework of the Vedas is to extract and represent these principles of eternal flow of life. So fundamentally, a sustainable path of life, that is the concern. So Rita ensures that the universe is in Sthiti. Rita ensures, that is conformance to Rita ensures that every changed state of life is also in Sthiti. So the relationship can be represented by the diagram on the right side, where Rita is what results in the dharmic set of actions that ensure that the universe is in Sthiti. Fundamentally, Dharma is the collective of all actions that are in accordance with Rita that ensure Sthiti. Next slide, please. Some more about Rita. Fundamentally, as I said, it is fundamental principles. It is Tattva. It is Vishwa Niyamaka Tattva. Rita determines the good change. It is not easy to comprehend, and that is why we have sages, rishis, who need to become the mantra drashtaras and who see the Rita, who can feel the Rita. And they are the ones who are Trikala Jnanis. They see the paths of natural flow of Rita, which we cannot see. And they also can perceive Rita and protect Rita through their tapasya. It requires immense tapasya to be able to do this. And that is why Bharatiya Parampara has an exalted position for the rishis. So as I said, Rita is such that it is not the flow itself, but it is the set of principles that determines the flow. And there is a difference between a rule or the flow itself or the principles that determine the flow, which means we have the freedom to pick principles. Pick and choose principles. So because of this definition of Rita, human beings have immense freedom in the Bharatiya Parampara. It's not that there is a rule and you have to follow that rule. From a collection of Rita principles, human beings have the freedom to organize their life according to a reduced set of Rita. And that is why we have different communities in Bharatiya Parampara, where each community is organized based on different set of principles. And those principles themselves are so flexible and they give a lot of autonomy to the people. So that is why the Rita principles represent many possibilities of life. So from here, we can go to 100 different states of life in the next. But we choose some through our freedom, but that freedom must be in accordance with Rita. So you have the freedom from 100 possibilities to choose one, but you do not have a 101st option. That is what is represented by this. So the collective of time, space, and human actions in accordance with Rita determines the next state of the universe of life. It should be in accordance with Rita. That is our concern. But human actions can either be in line or out of sync with Rita. And that will result in Dharma or Adharma. This is the relationship between Dharma and Rita, Without the perspective of Srishti, Sthiti, Laya, without Rita, you cannot define Dharma. Dharma is that which helps you be in line with Rita so that universe of life is in Sthiti. So the architecture of life should enable the pursuit of a collective of actions that are in accordance with Rita, which is Dharma. And this is the architecture of life pursued by the Bharatiya Parampara. So the Sthiti is that state which is in balance. There are hundreds of millions of Sthiti states that are in balance. You can be in any one. For that, you need to know Rita. So Bharatiya Parampara does not say be here only. There are a million possibilities for you, but beyond that, there is no possibility for you. In those possibilities of Sthiti, you can choose any, but for that you need to understand Rita. For that you need Dharma. That is the organization of life in Bharatiya Parampara. Next slide, please. So in some ways, you can represent this now, explaining the diagram further. So we saw more relationship between Dharma and Purusharthas, and how the Rita is related. Rita helps us define Dharma. Through Dharma, we become compliant with the Rita principles. Through that, we increase our possibility of attaining moksha. Through that, we increase the possibility of the universe being in Sthiti. Now, that can also be visualized in the right side diagram where the blue line is there. Blue line is if all your actions of Dharma and Artha and Kama are dharmic. But red line is when actions of Artha and Kama are adharmic, which is out of sync with Rita. So it leads to a non-Rita path. So our concern is anything that we create, the Srishti, that results in Artha and Kama must not disturb Rita. As long as it does not disturb Rita, we have full freedom to do what we want. It can also be visualized through this concentric set of circles. What is our journey of life? Our journey of life is to be as close to Srishti as possible. Sometimes the blue lines move away from Sthiti. Sometimes the Artha Kama actions bring us back closer to Sthiti. So the life moves away from Sthiti and towards Sthiti. So life is a constant oscillation between our towards Sthiti and away from Sthiti. We move away from Sthiti when Artha Kama loses touch with Rita. We move towards Sthiti when Artha Kama are in conformance with Rita through the dharmic actions. So this is our visualization of life. And this is very different from the modern perspective where everything is in a linear progress. For us, the concern is to be as close to Sthiti as possible. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So previous slide. Yeah. So we'll summarize, not this, the next one. So we'll summarize this. So we understand that some paths in life are in accordance with Rita. Some are not in accordance with Rita. So the ones that are always ensuring Sthiti are good Rita paths. Life must be in Sthiti, but only rishis can see such paths. So the state of moksha is always on the path of, being always in Sthiti and always in the path of Rita is what is moksha. Narayana state for some, Shiva state for others, depending upon what traditions one belongs to. Dharma is the infinite set of actions that keep us in perfect paths of Rita. Dharma is the binding force. That's why we call Dharma as Dharayati iti Dharma. That is one which upholds. How does it uphold? Uphold by being in, accordance with Rita. What does it uphold? It upholds Sthiti. So you are in accordance with Sthiti. So we also recognize that Srishti may not be perfect. it does not always create a perfect boat of travel journey. Srishti often takes universe in wrong directions. There are bad paths. Laya steps in sometimes and corrects. But our endeavor is to ensure that the pralaya does not happen, that our actions are in accordance with Rita and Dharma. So normally Laya ensures that the past, the old is gone and the new, there is space for new Srishti. But Laya also ensures large scale destruction when Sthiti goes Ari, because Srishti goes Ari. So when the natural flow of universe is obstructed or harmed, Laya steps in to create Pralaya. So the implications of this framework you have to see is that we are not rules oriented, rather we are principles oriented. Anything that results in sthiti, anything that is in conformance with Rita, any action, that is a dharmic action. So dharma is not defined as an explicit set of actions, although it is defined, but dharma has that freedom to say that anything that is in conformance with the Rita principles, anything that ensures a sthiti is definitely dharmic. That is why we have words such as exploration of dharma or dharma sukshma and so on and so forth. It is an outcome oriented definition. It is not a rules definition framework. So in summary, our primacy is for sthiti. Srishti and Laya are encompassed within sthiti. Next slide. So we will briefly touch upon this because we'll come back again to this. So as we saw, sthiti is moving from one balanced state to another balanced state. Movement requires srishti. Hence, that is creation of new things. Hence, we utilize resources of this universe. We utilize resources of this universe through our artha kama to move the universe of life from one sthiti point to another sthiti point. That is where the responsibility is placed upon us, that the new state must be balanced. Hence, there is a limit to creation. Because Srishti is subordinated to sthiti and must serve the purpose of sthiti, our use of resources for Srishti has that balance. This is a very big thing in Bharatiya Parampara, in the philosophy of the entire universe. Sustainability is a consequence of this alignment of Srishti with Sthiti. So the only purpose of Srishti is to maintain Sthiti. That is to fulfill our Artha Kama, but to maintain Sthiti. This dual responsibility on Srishti ensures that Artha Kama has a limited role in our life, and Sthiti, governs. I also said one more thing that in the beginning, that dharma moksha relationship is also very key. Dharma may be controlling artha and kama, but without moksha, the moksha is the one that ensures that there is space for dharma to operate and realize a natural control over artha and kama. So fundamentally, creation or the use of worldly resources through which we will fulfill our artha kama, and that is what is srishti, and this srishti is subservient to sthiti, and hence we put a limit on srishti. That is why we do not glorify change or novelty or creation beyond a certain point. That line drawn in this relationship is what has helped Bharatiya Parampara create a sustainable civilization for many millennia. So we do not deride Srishti, but we do not over glorify it as well. We limit it. Next slide, please. So what then is Dharma? Dharma then becomes the collection of all those acts in accordance to Rita to maintain Sthiti. Acts of Srishti that ensures that change is in the path of Rita and ensures that Sthiti then becomes Dharma. All good human deeds then become Dharma naturally, but even hard, tough actions of Laya protects the whichever protects Sthiti or Dharma as well, like the Kurukshetra battle. So violence in itself is not derided, but only when it results in Sthiti it is Dharma, otherwise it is not Dharma. An act of Dharma is always valued for its impact on the Sthiti of the day. It's not defined by a rule. It is defined by what is the impact on the Sthiti. That is why in Mahabharata many rules are violated, but still it results in Sthiti. Of course, only Sri Krishna can see that. All of us are not capable of seeing that. But an act that results in Sthiti quotient to be increased is Dharma. Even if 100 rules say it is a Dharma, if it increases Sthiti, then it is Dharma. Hence, it naturally becomes a function of today. We can define a principle framework, but it is an action that it is decided whether it is in Dharma or not. So the set of paths of natural flow available in front. Dharma helps us to choose the right natural flow from today to the next state. It cannot be reduced to a set of dogmatic values, laws, because of this definition of Dharma as an outcome-oriented one. So based on a set of universal principles, it is defined, but guided by what is the actual outcome or the possible outcomes. Hence, Dharma, we also have Dharma as a function of time, space, and universal principles. So this is the order. Universal principles, yes, but Desha Kala Vartamana. So this is what makes Dharma an exploration rather than a law. So this explains the reality that India has never made a single law book for all times. Things keep changing. Never depended, so always relied on ever evolving set of customs and traditions for this particular reason. It is looked up to epics for principles, and through epics and texts we derive a law book. That law book stays for some time and then vanishes. It also explains why Indians accepted the Constitution of India in 1947 without much ado. It was a very peaceful acceptance of a new constitution. So universal laws are abhorred by Indians, but universal principles are always explored so that through which laws can be determined at any point in time. Next slide, please. What then is moksha? Moksha is that state of a liberated mind where you perform all righteous actions of life, but you are unaffected still by the results and implications. You are equidistant from everything. Everything is important and everything is less important. You belong to nothing, but you actually belong to everything. You do anything and everything without the after effects being impacting upon you. You observe everything. It is gaining a creative distance from everything, where you're not dealing completely, but you're not coupled too strongly. You're not over-involved. This definition is because of the Srishti Sthiti Laya relationship. So you are in Sthiti means that you're still responsible for Srishti, but each Srishti is ensuring that you are in Sthiti. That is the Sri Krishna way. Sri Krishna ensures that many things happen on the ground. He creates many things, but he is not attached to any of that. The only thing that he is doing is to ensure that the world is, back to balance and in Sthiti. The greatness of Bharatiya Parampara is that all this is not at a very philosophical level only. It is translated into traditions and customs and rituals, so that this is comprehensible to everybody at a certain level, whether they are able to articulate it or not. That doesn't matter. So a scholarly or intellectual exposition is not necessary in India to pursue the Purusharthas. So in India, the achievability of this state of moksha is what has ensured that the Purushartha perspective and everything else is sustained over a period of time. So entire society has this faith and trust, and this trust has ensured the space for dharma And that dharma is in accordance with Rita is what defines our civilization in a very different manner. So such is the role of the Purusharthas and the Srishti Sthiti Laya in the Bhartiya Parampara. Next slide, please. So this dynamic of the universe of life can be viewed a little bit like this. Assume that all the orange spots are for perfect Rita spots, and assume that the yellow spots are slightly in imbalance. Assume that the red spots are in terrible balance from where one can slip off into pralaya. So Artha and Kama, A and K, move universe of life from one spot to another spot. Our purpose is to ensure that we pass through maximum orange spots. Yes, we may end up being in a yellow spot, unstable spot, but we figure out another set of Artha and Kama actions collectively as universe to move once again into another Rita spot where Sthiti quotient is very high. Even from a disastrous spot, we believe that there are a set of Artha Kamas which we can use to come back to normal Sthiti. So there is no one destination here. The destination is always the next best Rita spot for us. Unlike civilizations where there is a destination to be achieved or where there is a straight line to be drawn, we do not draw a straight line. Our diversity of life and beauty of life is higher because of this definition of life. Of course, at times we end up in red spot and we end up in continuous red spots, and then the universe knows what to do. Pralaya sets in, entire reset happens, and then cycle begins again. Which is what is represented by this diagram that I have mentioned here, a circle diagram. So we move sometimes away from Sthiti, at other times towards Sthiti. Sometimes we cross this red line and then we enter Pralaya, and then the whole cycle begins. So this is not a straight line perspective of life, rather it is a game away from Sthiti and towards Sthiti. So the game is to be always closer to Sthiti as possible. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Shirji? Yeah, so we'll just touch upon what is karma. It's now very clear. Karma is the collective of all actions for our kama and artha. The karma that is adding without abandoning the path of Rita. So you see, because Srishti Sthiti Laya and Purusharthas are defined like this, we are now able to define the next concept, kama. Like this, literally every concept in the web of Bharatiya Parampara can now be defined in the context of Purusharthas and Srishti Sthiti Laya. So the karma is the one that helps us move to a nearby good Rita spot in change. Of course, it's not that easy. That is why the sages have defined karmas for each of the communities, and then the communities move, practice these karmas over a period of over generations and ensure that their life is according to the Rita paths. No one karma can individually do that. It's a collective that is responsible. Next slide, please. Move next slide. Shreyaji, next slide. So now we will move to the civilizational implications of this. We defined the ontology. This is the ontological foundation of Bharatiya Parampara. Now, what difference has it made to the material life and the cultural life of Bharatiya Parampara over millennium? We will see some examples, not limited to this. In the short time that we have, we will look at a few examples. Next slide. So I have chosen some examples which I have listed over here. We will see how the theory of change is different in Bharatiya Parampara. We'll also see how sustainability is an integral element. We will see new definitions of progress and material world. Rather, we will a rejection of the notions of progress the way we see in modernity. We will also see a different theory of time. We will also see a definition of Saundarya, a very unique definition of Saundarya, and what purpose does it serve. We will also see that how knowledge and system design is very different in Bhartiya Parampara because of something called Sutra. And we will also see how the definition of what is a problem, how it is different. By problem, I mean in the sense of the modernity. In this world, today we solve problems, but we choose problems to solve. Some problems are more interesting to us than other problems. How is it that the Bharatiya Parampara chooses a problem to solve? We will see that. And that has implications to many things. We'll also see how this perspective has resulted in a very maintainable version of everything, systems or traditions or everything. Why diversity is a consequence of this perspective. How this perspective has resulted in decentralization. Why this has given more autonomy to an individual and empowerment, more empowerment of the individual, rather than how today in the modern world it is considered as restrictive, but instead it is Bharatiya Parampara's ontology that has given more freedom and autonomy to individuals. We will see that. Next slide, please. So we'll first discuss a bit about sustainability and theory of change. As we saw, Srishti is aligned with Sthiti, which means that Srishti cannot go ori. It has to conform to the rules of Rita. Rather, it is our endeavor to conform it to the rules of principles of Rita towards Sthiti. And as a result, there is a limit to our Artha and Kama indulgence. And this puts a limit to the material resources that we use. And this is how sustainability is an integral part. Sustainability has taken a beating in today's era because we are not able to draw a line as to where we should end our material indulgence. That is because in the modern world, Srishti has an independent value. Srishti is glorified. Change is valued. Sthiti kind of tries to catch up with Srishti in the modern world. That is how the world is organized. But Bharatiya organization of life at all levels is that Srishti is aligned with Sthiti. This single philosophical difference has ensured that whether it is in industry, whether it is in any aspect of life, we do not pursue material beyond a point because we value something else beyond Artha and Kama. The absence of Dharma and the absence of Moksha is what has resulted in the world becoming unsustainable. So the philosophical definition is a very important thing. This also results in a different theory of change. In Bharatiya Parampara, all change is not good change. A change that results in movement towards Sthiti has a higher value. A change that results in away from Sthiti has lower value. This pursuit of Sthiti through Moksha is the differentiator for Bharatiya Parampara. So our theory of change is effectively navigating change in accordance with Rita. That is our theory. It is not to reach a particular destination. It is not to constantly increase the speed of a vehicle. That is not change for us. That is merely change. That is not Sthiti. Our Srishti says that The speed of the vehicle may increase or tomorrow we may have to reduce in accordance to whether we must reach, we must be in alignment with Sthiti or not. This definition, this theory of change we recognize change as an essential dynamic. We recognize it as a fundamental reality, but we do not pursue change independently. Whereas in the modern world, we pursue change independently. That is the essence of sustainability in Bhartiya Parampara. Next slide, please. So we will, this more of a, so we do not believe that the universe needs to be bettered. But we say that change is the nature of the world. We do not say change, we must change. We say change is the nature of the world. That is it. There is a lot of difference between the two. So our aspiration is, as it's a repetition, is act according to Dharma, ensure change is in the path of Rita, ensure universe of life is in Sthiti, and attain Sthiti. Change is subordinated to this and is not an independent value in Bhartiya Parampara, due to which progress in the material world for us is merely a relative progress. It is not an independent progress. We also don't say, we define progress for an individual, fulfill your artha kama through dharma and attain moksha. But we do not define progress for communities independently. It's not that the GDP of the universe may need to be increased, that is okay, but that is not an independent value that we will pursue. A GDP increase may increase Sthiti or reduce Sthiti, depending upon how we manage the GDP change. So the value is Sthiti and not GDP. GDP is subordinated to Sthiti in Bharatiya Parampara. And that is why we have a far more sustainable world. So for us, the material world is fascination, desire, meaning and security, but not progress. We fulfill our desires through material progress, but we are not saying that is progress for the entire world. This delinking the definition of progress from the material world is one achievement of Bharatiya Parampara, which is the trap that modernity is in today. And how is this happening? This is happening because of the definition of concepts of Rita, Dharma, and Sthiti and Moksha, which are completely absent in the modern world. Hence, sustainability is a very natural outcome in this philosophy. Next slide, please. Of course, we do not, so we discussed this already. Change is valued, progress is necessary, but change is not progress. Progress itself is not independent value. Being in balance with Rita is what we pursue. Progress is necessary, but it is just essential for minimum Srishti. So the material world is not progress, it's a mere change. As a result, we have never viewed progress in an independent way. It is always in conformance with Rita. So this is different from modernity. In fact, modernity violates these principles very, very significantly. As I said, GDP will never attain universal primacy in this perspective. It's always a relative emphasis on GDP. Next slide. So this also ensures that we are not having a linear version of time. So time does not keep on, moving further. For us, that notion of time does not exist. For us, the only notion of time that exists is either we are away from Sthiti or we are moving towards Sthiti. Sometimes we cross the red line of movement from Sthiti as is represented on the right side. And when that happens, if the whole, there is a dissolution of universe and, a recreation that happens. So there is a cyclical trajectory of time. So this is not a universal straight line trajectory of time. That's a very big thing. This is why Bharatiya Parampara did not emphasize too much on history at a certain point in time until we were forced after 19th century. We were not bothered about writing histories for millennia. We were bothered about writing epics that will help people to live a much better life. We were not interested in drawing the lineages beyond a certain point. We may still have drawn it, but that is not the fundamental essence of our life. So this is the result of the relationship between Srishti and Sthiti. Sometimes Srishti results in movement towards Sthiti, sometimes away. When it goes too far, Laya steps in, cycle restarts. So this is one another implication of this relationship. Next slide, please. The other this is even more important. We define Artha and Kama. Modernity derives a sense of beauty from Artha and Kama overindulgence. We said that Bhartiya Parampara limits Artha and Kama. Srishti is aligned with Sthiti. So where does our beauty of life comes from? Our beauty of life comes from, as we see on the right side, not just the consummatory and performative beauty, which is Artha and Kama. It is from the aesthetic, ritualistic, and yogic renunciatory beauty. We have defined beauty in the path of renunciation. We have defined beauty in the path of yoga. We have defined beauty in the experience of a ritual. And we have ensured that every consummatory and performative, which means, consummatory, you consume, or you perform is the actions that you perform, you elevate it to an aesthetic level. So by bringing in aesthetics, rituals, yoga, and beautiful paths of renunciation and defining beauty, we have ensured that our consummatory experiences and performative experiences are under control. This is how we have ensured sustainability in Bhartiya Parampara. It's because of this that our Artha and Kama indulgence is as less as as it is, yet our lives are beautiful. And this balance ought not to be disturbed. In the modern world, there is some aesthetic beauty, but the ritualistic beauty, yogic renunciatory beauty are completely derided. Consummatory and performative beauties, as we see in the modern world, has escalated beyond a point, and that is a crisis of sustainability that we are seeing today. Of course, all this is not in theory. All this, previous slide please. All this philosophy has translated into principles, has translated into social organizations, traditions, practices, customs, and rituals. There is an integrity between what I'm saying and how it has translated into social organizations downwards, which is a subject of an entirely different presentation, how it has translated, and we can explain that. But it is this definition of beauty and organization into a very diverse life and complex life of communities that has ensured that whatever previously we said, our ability to pursue Rita, our true dharma, and ensure Sthiti is of a higher order. Without this definition of beauty, of aesthetics, rituals, yoga, renunciation, and the organization into social organizations, traditions, practices, we would have not been able to achieve what we have gained as philosophical, through the philosophical clarity of Srishti Sthiti Laya. And for this, we have to thank the sages of India who have architected the life. Next slide, please. This in itself is an entirely different paper. I've written a paper on this. Rita, as I mentioned earlier, is quite complex and is not easy to comprehend. That is why sages have, through their tapasya, have realized the Veda mantras and which contain the Rita principles. So are we dependent on sages for everything? That is not so. The sages have converted this knowledge into sutras, which is available through various texts. And the sutras is not just a Veda mantra reality. It is a fundamental knowledge representation schema in Bharatiya Parampara. For instance, Ashtadhyayi, which is a language treatise, it's a grammar and so much more. In 4,000 sutras represents a fascinatingly complex world of Sanskrit on one side, language on the other side, completely. Where each sutra, if you take, it's independent, it is explaining an aspect of the language. In each sutra, you cannot get the complexity of what it is trying to do. But if you take a collection of 25 sutras, then together what it is able to represent, the complex world it is able to represent, is astounding. And this is very different. This is called the Sutra paradigm of knowledge representation. The West has something called model-based thinking, model-based representation. There is one beautiful paper written by Dr. Roddam Narasimha on this, and which everybody must read, which I can share as reference through Rashtram. So fundamentally, it's not just Ashtadhyayi. Everything else, Dharma Sutras, you take any discipline, even mathematics is represented through sutras. So the ability to represent everything in small ways, but a large collection results in the representation of a complex phenomenon, is a system design paradigm. That is why Bharatiya Parampara has created so many communities. Each community operates independently through its own sutras. So if you go to a Sthapati, a Shilpi, he has his own set of sutras for sculpting. And the paradigm is a sutra. The paradigm of sutra is coming from the fact that a complex phenomenon cannot be reduced to models as we are doing today, which will be imperfect. So, but a collection of sutras can approximate the phenomenon in a beautiful manner. This is coming from the need to approximate Rita. Rita cannot be realized, cannot be represented through models, can be represented through sutras, a complex set of sutras. So the concept of Rita, which is philosophical and which is experiential, has been translated into the material sutras, which is the fundamental anchor of the civilization of Bharatavarsha. So the same collection of sutras can be used to represent a system or a community or a shastra. Every shastra is a collection of sutras. A community is a collection of sutra. A discipline of practice such as Shilpa Shastra is also a collection of sutras. So this is what a sutra is, such that you can replace one sutra with another sutra. Whereas in a model, replacement is not easy. It is quite complex. And that is why what we are creating today through model thinking, it's very difficult to change it. If you establish a form of democracy, tomorrow you don't like it, you can't change it that easily because it is represented as a model. If you represent it as a collection of sutras, you can change it very significantly. This is what has ensured that communities and individuals live with greater autonomy, greater sense of empowerment, and each community creates its own set of sutras, and there is decentralization and diversity as a consequence of this. Next slide, please. So this is Sutra is the Indian systems thinking paradigm. This is the last slide, and this is very important. Modern world has created a fascination around problem solving. So we all enjoy saying that we solved a problem. But modern world also has an implicit way of choosing a certain problem. From among many problems, we choose some problems. So for instance, even though it was needed, the world was not investing in solar energy for a very long time. Not that the problem was difficult, not challenging enough. It was very challenging. It would have been extremely intellectually satisfying that the world was not investing in it. So there is a certain way in which we choose a problem to be solved. And that in the modern paradigm is continuous improvement of something. The moment you defined a computer chip, created a computer chip, constantly increasing the speed or the capabilities of the chip is an independent narrative in the modern world. So there is a pull towards that. But That is because progress, the narrative of progress and development does that, which is in a certain straight line. It tries to pull everything in a certain straight line. But how does Bharatiya Parampara choose a problem statement? We chose a problem statement through a completely different means. That is, will this help us move towards a sthiti? If we have 10 problems to be solved, the problem that we will choose is the one that helps us move towards sthiti. So of course, it's also a function of our ability to determine whether it will move towards sthiti or not, which is the essence of the civilization that we've lost in the last 300 years. But the organization of life into communities was such that we avoid non-Rita spots, we avoid unstable spots and disaster spots, and constantly choose a Rita spot. That is our problem statement. So for that, if solar energy indulgence helps us, we indulged. If it didn't, we did not indulge. This is the balance that we had in Bharatiya Parampara. This is what is the problem choosing mechanism. So for us, solution is not creation of a new material, rather whether it helps us move towards, something of this sort or not. So towards sthiti or not. So this is another consequence of Srishti, Sthiti, Laya and the Purushartha. So with this, next slide, please. So as we can see here, for us, there are many yellow spots, and in each of the yellow spots, our endeavor is, to pick and choose that Rita spot which has the highest Rita quotient. So for us, life should be a journey through maximum Rita spots or unstable spots, or unstable spots with the highest Rita quotient. So our eternal problem statement for us is, how do we pick or negotiate our Arthakama actions so that we reach a nearby Rita spot with highest Rita quotient. For us, leadership also has a different definition from this. For us, the leadership is the ability to see through the next set of spots and determine which is a Rita spot of highest Rita quotient. That is our definition of leadership. So for us, every single thing that we do is determined by our clarity of sthiti, Rita, and the alignment of Purushartha through that. So with this, I end my presentation. If there are any questions, we can take the next 20 minutes. Any questions?
Thank you so much, Shivakumar Ji. We have a question from Sanjeev Ji. I request him to unmute and pose his question to you.
My question is regarding moksha.
Yeah.
Is moksha attainable through effort within this paradigm? Because, I've learned not only through readings, but through certain discourses that, moksha is not in our control. It is a kind of that X factor from the universe. And some of the higher chakras, you can't even open on your own. So my simple question is moksha the X factor? Or is it something that through effort, karma, and this entire cosmology you've created, which is it?
It is the Shraddha of the Sanatana tradition is that it is an achievable state through our karmas in accordance with dharma, which will be in accordance with Rita and hence Sthiti. Of course, it is also a function of our Kala, Desha, Vartamana and the Purva Janma, Samskaras and so many things, whether we are able to pursue a set of karmas, to move towards that. Whether a single individual can or not is difficult to say. Only a realized person will be able to assess that. But does the framework negate it? No, the framework does not negate it. And the Shraddha and the experience of the tradition is that it is an achievable state, it is a real state, it is an experienced state, and it is not an abstraction. And yes, it is possible that we may be in a certain path where we do not have enough clarity, so we are moving towards more red spots than the yellow and the Rita spots. It is possible. And we may not have the right guru to guide us towards, in the path of Sthiti. So hence guidance is extremely important. One of the reasons why Bharatiya Parampara has organized life in communities is that individuals can never see through this completely. It is in a good community life that you can progress better, and it is in the presence of a guru that you can progress better. But what is important is, this definition and the framework has it is the relationship between Srishti, Sthiti, Laya and the Purushartha that is helping us do all this navigation. The dharma attains its meaning through its relationship with Rita and Sthiti. And moksha attains its meaning in the definition of Sthiti. So the moment we understand the Sthiti as dynamic but being in stable equilibrium, which is in physics a very difficult thing, in the material world is a very difficult thing, that is when the perspective of moksha also becomes clear.
Thank you, Shivakumar ji. I request Dr. Rajat K. Pradhan ji to go next.
Yeah. Thank you, Shivakumar ji. The wonderful talk and wonderful theorization. But one thing I would like to ask, how to move out of a disaster spot using complexity. Could you please illustrate using an example? For example, a company has run into insolvency. So how to get out of that? Some examples.
Very, very excellent question. I think, that is where, unless modern institutions define Purushartha for them, this is not possible. Today, the problem with our world till 18th, 19th century was that every community knew its Purusharthas. If you know your Purusharthas, it is in summary, you have organized all the Rita spots and you know all the Rita spots and so on and so forth. So when you're on a red spot, you have some tradition and the guidance and set of parameters to navigate. Now, all modern institutions are in the modern paradigm of universal progress. And there is no Purushartha defined for them. The first step to realign the world towards sustainability is to define the Purusharthas. If we define the Purusharthas, then the red spots, orange spots, and the yellow spots begin to become clear. We don't have the language and the instruments to even say something is a red spot. We will achieve it, we will realize it only after touching that. In which case, it is extremely difficult to, get out of that. A sage will be able to say three spots before say that there is a red spot out there. And even today, I'm sure in companies where people have this tendency, they will be able to spot it. Even though, I'm sure it's not necessary that this philosophy has to be there. Some people are born with this philosophy and they will be able to see through this. So, systemically, I would say, if we begin to ask this question, what is your Purushartha and what is your Sutra organization, then I think we'll begin to take steps towards that. I think it's an excellent question. I mean, this is really the crux of the crisis today.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rajat ji. May I invite Dr. Krishna Gopal ji next?
Shivakumar ji, my question is that in one of your slides you said that and you mentioned that time is cyclic. But I am not unable to attach that statement with the Srishti, Sthiti, and Laya. So can you please throw some light on that?
Yeah, but what we mean is that, let's take history. In history, we say that something started at some point, it moved, it changed, it has evolved, it has developed, and it is moving in a certain straight line. For example, we say democracy has to increase, or liberty has to increase. These are all modern values where we pursue its increase over a period of time. And life keeps moving and there is some destination that you have to reach. And that is coming from some other philosophy in the West, and I will not go into that. What we say is that things may never constantly progress. Something may start, but something may fold and move away. Its time ends and something else comes in. So the time is not an eternal journey in one direction. Kingdoms come, kingdoms go away. Some industry comes, some industry goes away. So there is a start and an end for everything. It folds itself and goes away, and that's not just for material, but for everything else it is so. We do not say that our life is better than the past and our future ought to be better than ours. That kind of a time flow is not there for us. We say that the past must flow into the present and must flow naturally into the future by facing all factors of today. And there must be continuity of life, which is called as satatya in our philosophy. So satatya is important, not a linear flow of time. So when it is satatya, what we seek is sthiti at every point. If it deteriorates, things will get recreated or a new thing happens. That's why in India, people have migrated from one place to another place. Their histories have ended at some place. It has restarted at a certain. They do not worry, about linearly organizing all of that. History is the greatest example. We do not look at 4 AD, 4th century, 5th century, 6th century. We are forced now to look at it like that post the modernity. But for us, that is not the concern. Time flows for us towards sthiti, away from sthiti. We do something, we end up away from sthiti. Then we come back towards sthiti. That is why after winning all wars, Rama says, okay, time has come, Lava and Kusha, things are ending, you go to far off places and, establish your, kingdoms elsewhere. So time seems to be ending over there and recreating itself elsewhere. There's a fresh start to everything without having to cling on to something in the past. So this is the cyclicality of time. So when Srishti goes ori from sthiti, you have to recreate everything, and that applies to literally everything, whether it is an industry or a small organization of life within a village or everything else.
Thank you again, Shivakumar ji. There are some questions in the chat box. May I read it to you?
Yeah, please.
Okay. So Subhash Yadavji asks, could you briefly explain the concept of a Shastra? How is it different from modern academic disciplines like economics, sociology, etc.?
Yeah, so the difference is in what it pursues. One, how knowledge is represented, that is Sutra. Most of the Shastric knowledge is in Sutra. Two, the next difference is it is organized towards the Purushartha of some community. Three, it is in the pursuit of Sthiti, excellence. You may pursue excellence, but full Purushartha is defined and the objective is to increase the Sthiti of the universe. This is the third difference. Fourth difference is it will organize itself into, different times, different spaces. What are the right karma? What is the good karma? If you perform what act, phala, you will get outcome, so on and so forth. That is the paradigm. But all that paradigm is to ensure that you are defining the Purushartha of some community very well. You are defining the Purushartha of some discipline for its excellence, but for its alignment with Moksha and Sthiti. That is why, the sculpture is the best example. But sculpture in Bharatiya Parampara is always to ensure that the murtis are aiding Dharma. And it instills a sense of devotion, it instills a sense of pursuing of Sthiti through Dharma. This is the bedrock of every Shastra, whether it is Shilpa Shastra or whether it is, Yoga Shastra, everything else. Everything else has a praxis organized towards Srishti Sthiti Laya through the Purusharthas.
Wonderful. Thank you, sir, once again. Now, there is another question from Dr. Ashima Tripathi ji. She asks, how can one know that they aren't in, how can one know that they are in a non-Rita spot? And how to move to the Rita spot from there?
So this is where the crisis of the modern world lies in. Unless you are in a community where the Purushartha is well defined, this is difficult. Now, this is the crisis for individuality. Why Bharatiya Parampara has not pushed individuality beyond a point rather than the individualism beyond a point? If you look at all our entire tradition, every individual that is carved stands out. Nobody has suffered loss of individuality, but there is no pursuing of individualism in Bharatiya Parampara for this reason. Because within a community, you can define the Purushartha and alignment with Rita and Sthiti very well. Probably for a family you can do, but for an individual it is extremely difficult because no individual pursues life without profession, without life around, and you cannot define it for every single individual. Now the trajectory of every individual has become so complex that it is extremely difficult to define a Rita and a non-Rita spot for an individual. This is why the insecurity in modern world is increasing. Even though the material progress is, has enormously increased compared to the past. And that is resulting in, the suicide rates. If you look at it, is higher in affluent areas than in the rural areas for this particular reason. The lack of clarity. So we have defined individualism and, we have made weak people suffer the result of individualism. Because we cannot define a Rita and a non-Rita spot for that easily. We may be able to, but the effort required is so high, it's impossible. It's like breaking a security code in the modern IT world. It's as complex as that. A wonderful question.
Thank you. Are there any more questions? I request the participants to raise hand.
Sriharji, finally, I would like to present the last slide of my acknowledgements.
Sure. So there, it looks like we don't have any more questions. Shivji, shall I share the slide?
Yeah, please, please.
Okay.
The last slide. So I thank INDICA, which is where I have been developing these concepts for some time. Mahabharata is my inspiration. Rita is what really started this quest in me. Like I said, River Saraswati is an inspiration. I thank all the Devi Devatas, Rishis, and my family for the environment and friends for a lot of discussions. These things haven't evolved in just study. And Sri Ramashesha has been a guiding light for me. And I thank all the Pravachanakaras. I think we should listen to the discourse masters of Bharatiya Parampara. There's a lot to learn from them across disciplines. Today, because of audio, we get to do this. And of course, I thank Rashtram for the institutional thinking and the leadership development that they are doing. As I said in the beginning, River Saraswati represents the flow of thought, the riverine flow of thought of Bharatiya Sanatana Dharma. Let it flow forever through all of you. Dhanyavad.
Thank you once again, Shivakumar ji. It was great to listen to Srishti, Sthiti, Laya framework once again. I just wanted to also mention that I got the opportunity to go through a module on this for a week. So it was a very good representation, a refresher for me, in fact. And I'm definitely sure all the other participants also had so much insight and thought-provoking, lessons from this session. Thank you so much once again.
Thank you, Shri. Thank you, Dr. Rita.
Yeah. All right. So I hope,